seeing Europe firsthand and what has happened to the family in Europe is alarming. My wife and I lived in Vienna, Austria. Challenging to raise a family, to say the least. The secular humanism that has creeped in, the rise of postmodernity, the dissolution of the church in many areas, all of these things create a perfect firestorm for conflict and for trouble. But there is a glimmer of hope, and we have a lot to be hopeful for. There are great organizations in Europe that are leading the fight in defense of the family, leading the fight in defense of marriage, in defense of life. And so today we are privileged to be able to listen to 4 speakers who will bring wisdom, bring enlightenment, share their information, and hopefully inspire you on potential partnership, ideas, collaboration. First, I'd like to welcome, and we're in no particular order here. I'll start here at the end. Maria Hildingsson, she is the Secretary General of the European Federation of Catholic Families Association. Originally from Sweden, she now resides in Brussels and is working as a voice for family, particularly with a perspective on Catholic family doctrine and policy there in the European Union. Next to her is Alexey Komov. Alexey is the World Congress of Families representative in Russia and the CIS. He is a documentarian, director of television network. He also is the World Congress of Family ambassador appointee to the United Nations. So Alexey from Moscow, welcome. We're glad to have you. Laszlo Marki, he is the president of the European Large Families Confederation and advocating for large families, as it sounds, in Europe. And this is, of course, with the demographic decline of the large family in Europe, a great need. So welcome. Thank you. Finally, many of you may know him as one of our chaplains for the World Congress of Families, lovingly as Father Jay, an avid, passionate speaker for the family, for marriage, as well as a runner. And when he's not busy teaching, Dr. Jaroslaw Szymcsak from Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski University in Poland. Father Jay, welcome. I'm asking our speakers to make their remarks from 10 to 15 minutes. Try to cap them at 15 if we can. We would like to try to arrange some time at the end for question and answer if that's available. If we are able to get to questions and answers, I will ask that you have one question, and if you have any follow-ups from that, please ask our speakers afterwards so we can respect everyone's time and hopefully can get the questions out that we need. Speakers, I'm going to start here at the end, and if you would please make your presentation. I will not come back up until the end for some closing remarks and to guide us through the discussion at the end of the time.
So I take it it's ladies first.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'd like, first of all, to thank the World Congress of Families for this invitation. It is a pleasure to come to Salt Lake City. In fact, the federation that I'm working for was granted last week with an award, an EU policy, family policy award, by the LDS Church, so it comes very timely to come here right now. And I also know that many people living in Utah are of Swedish origin, so I feel very much at home. Now, it is rather uncommon in the European context to be at a table where we are 4. There is only 1 woman and 3 men because we work a lot for equality in Europe.
Between.
Yeah, not in between, but no, more seriously speaking, what is more uncommon is to be 1 person from Western Europe and 3 persons representing countries from Eastern Europe. And I'm very grateful and happy for this, because coming from one of the most progressive countries in the European continent, I believe we have a lot to learn from those countries that experienced communism. And I believe that that experience has kept a sound spirit in many of those countries. Now, talking about Europe and the family, past, present, and the future, as is the theme of this session, is a very vast topic. So I've decided to focus more on the present and the future challenges and opportunities for families on our continent. Now, as said by the moderator, I'm based in Brussels. I work as a lobbyist for family policy, both at the European Union, where there are 28 member states, and also at the Council of Europe, where there are 47 member states. And my observations and my thoughts that I want to share with you are based on my everyday work as an observer in the European institutions. I think that overall the economic situation for families in Europe has improved if we were to look over a period of 1 century. Nevertheless, many families in Europe today, they face difficulties due to the recent economic crisis, and many families have difficulties making ends meet. They also have difficulties actually finding the balance between their family life and their work life, because in many cases, work conditions are not adapted to the family's needs. And that is in spite of what several European texts are saying about family. In the 1950s, there was a treaty, the Treaty of Rome, that founded the European Union, where the member states at that time, there were only 6, they agreed to try to harmonize social policies in Europe. Now, a couple of decades later, we can see that not only is it difficult to do so, there is not necessarily the competence for the European Union to do so, but there are also big differences among the countries. In 1961, the European Social Rights Committee, which is based in Strasbourg in France, and the Council of Europe, provided the European Social Charter, which is a charter of rights, social rights. And there's an Article 16 in this charter, which is very important as regards the protection of family. And it actually obliges all the member states, the 47 member states of the Council of Europe, to protect and support families. Nevertheless, many things have changed since 1961. And today we can see that families and young people lack confidence in the future. The European Union is standing in front of a huge demographic challenge. There is no member state in the European Union out of the 27 member states that has a fertility rate, a birth rate, which is high enough to renew the population. But still, surveys show that if people in Europe could have as many children as they desire, they would have, in average, 1 more child, which would actually resolve the whole situation when it comes to demography in Europe. Because one of the big questions that our decision makers are asking themselves right now is who is going to care for our elders, for the sick, for children in the future, as we have less and less young people. We have an aging population and not enough young people. This is one of the challenges. Another one is the relational challenge, and this is of course also very true in the whole Western sphere in the world, with high rates of divorce, separation and family breakdown. Just to give one concrete example, in Sweden, which is my home country, the main reason of death among our teenagers today is suicide. And when you listen to the debate with experts in my country, because of course this is very, very concerning to everyone, why are our young people committing suicide? And experts are looking for it, for solutions, but also for the reasons behind this. In all the public debates that I've heard about this, there is absolutely no mention of parents, siblings, or family. There is only talk about what the school can do, what school psychologists, school nurses, teachers, the society, the welfare state can do. Of course, this is all very important, but only as a support to the family. So the family is actually, as the basic unit of society, very much forgotten in the European society context. And this is also very clear when one looks at the strategy for the European Union. There is a strategy leading up to the year 2020. And in this strategy, there is a lot of talk about how to make the European more competitive, how to have more economic growth, and so forth. And still, although there is great awareness about the demographic situation, there are no thoughts whatsoever on how to adapt these strategies to the needs of the European people. And one of those needs is, of course, the needs of the family. In the United Kingdom, the minister in charge of family policy announced in 2013 that the public cost, that is taxpayers' money, for family breakdown in the United Kingdom is equivalent to 46 billion British pounds. That is a lot of money. So there are huge costs which are economic, which are demographical, but there are also high costs for the relational aspects. And we know that teenagers across the world are hoping to found a family, are hoping to found relationships that will last a lifetime. And still there is very little public support and recognition of the role of marriage and family. And this is why I think we have the biggest challenge on our continent, because there is a great divide between the East and the West. We have legislations in countries stretching from Portugal in the very southwest of our continent up to Finland, which recognize unions or marriages between two people of the same sex, and hence introducing a new interpretation of the concept of marriage, but also the concept of family, because in most of these countries, those couples will also have the right to adopt children. When one has debates on these issues in the European institutions, it is very clear that there is a huge cultural divide between the member states and between the East and the West. This is present in the debates in the European Union, but much more so at the Council of Europe. And at the Council of Europe, one can note that there is a lot of social engineering going on to push a certain ideological agenda. In 2012, the overall budget of this international institution was drastically reduced. And all the units dealing with education, human rights issues and so forth had to reduce their staff and their budgets. But there was one exception. A new unit was created, which is called the LGBT rights unit. I'll spell it out for those who are not familiar with those terms. It's lesbian, bi, gay and transsexual rights. This unit is funded by a group of about 12 or 10 governments who are bilaterally funding a unit within an international institution to push an ideological agenda and to try to promote it in countries which are members of this international institution, but who culturally do not agree with those ideas. In my country, the political debate has gone so far as to have a majority of our political parties that all include either a youth section or even the whole party standing behind positions in favour of what is called number-neutral marriages, which is opening up marriage to any group of people of 3 and more people. Now that is a stark contrast in comparison to what's happened in some other countries. In France in 2013, there were mass demonstrations. I was myself in Paris twice to demonstrate, and I was part of the crowd of more than 1 million people in the street, calling on the government and on the parliament to respect marriage as being a union between one woman and one man, and also to respect the bond of filiation between children and their parents, and the right of children to be brought up by their mother and their father. In Croatia and in Slovenia, there have been referendums to strengthen marriage and the definition of marriage within the constitution as being the union of a man and a woman. There has also been strong debates on the issue of sexual education and parental rights in Europe. And I don't know if this has come to your ears, but in 2013 we had a huge debate in the European Parliament around a report called the Estrela Report. It was a report on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And it included absolutely anything you could imagine to promote abortion, access to contraceptives, access to sexual education in primary and secondary school, which should be interactive and without taboos between pupils and their teachers. Now, This report triggered a huge debate and a huge mobilization among citizens. And I think this is where we see light in Europe. We see that there are nations standing up for marriage, standing up for the protection of marriage within the Constitution. We see that there are hundreds of thousands of people in the street, and this is really something we can build on. So what can we do in Europe? And these are thoughts which can probably be pursued in other parts of the world. We need to turn this popular expression into political change. We need to find the mechanisms to be able to have public policies that recognize the will of the majority of the people, which is often the silent majority. We need to support parents and inform them about their rights and their role as the first and primary educators of their children, and invite institutions and policymakers to support parents in their role. We need to give testimony to marriage and family life, because many of the young people on our continent today have no role models. They have not grown up in united families. They dream about marriage and family, but they don't believe it can come true. We also need to inform faith communities about what is happening. This is why a congress like this is very important. In fact, one of the strategies currently of those who are advocating for marriage as being any concept, family as being any concept, they are advocating also for rights to abortion, to contraceptives without any parental consent for minors and so forth. One of their strategies is to try to divide faith communities on these issues. And therefore it is very important to reach out to all the faith communities and their leaders to inform them about the political evolution. One example is to inform them about funding. There is a lot of debate in the United States right now about Planned Parenthood and the sale of aborted baby body parts. But there is also an international Planned Parenthood Federation which was founded in the 1950s. And its budget, which is about $130 million per year, is mainly coming from government sources. There's about 15 governments across the world funding this federation. And most funding comes from Europe. The first government funding IPBF is the United Kingdom. The second one is Sweden, my country. And if you split that onto the number of people in the population, my government is the first funder of IPBF. I think overall what we need to do is to reach out to people on our continent, but also across the world, to share information on what's happening and try to give courage to people to break out of the political correctness, to follow the wisdom of our hearts and our conscience. We need to search for opportunities for dialogue, and there are also some lights here. Issues such as human trafficking, such as prostitution, and such as surrogacy motherhood have actually become issues where we can build bridges with those we are currently sharing very few common opinions. And rather than just promoting family values, we also need to give testimony to family virtues. Family is something which will remain throughout history, but we stand at a very critical standpoint, not only in Europe, but across the world. And everyone can make a difference. So I'll leave the floor to the second speaker with those thoughts. Thank you very much.
So I think I should proceed. My name is Alexey Komov, as Justin has told you, and I'm in Moscow, Russia, representing World Congress of Families in this part of the world. And we have arranged a demographic summit, Family and the Future of Humanity, Moscow in 2011, and then the large Family Congress last year in September in Kremlin and in Christ the Savior Cathedral, which are the main locations in Russia. And we were inside Kremlin walls in the Congress, in the Palace of Congresses, where the huge gatherings of Communist Party used to be in the old times, and we were there. It was at our disposal, and we had a great laser show in the old Kremlin Temple Square. And it was supposed to be World Congress of Families 8, but then because of these sanctions, tensions that came along at the wrong time, it was not called officially World Congress of Families, but nevertheless it was a very successful, large international event. Also, I'm engaged in the new television channel that we have just launched in Russia. This is the most pro-family, Christian, conservative TV channel in Russia. And we just have a great view from our windows from the studio on the Kremlin, Christ the Savior, Cathedral, Duma. So if you happen to be in Moscow, please come to us and we will record a good interview with you so you can speak to the Russian audience. And since recently I'm also making some documentaries in different parts of the world defending our values. So traditional values, so family values. So if you have great ideas, please share and we can maybe do something together. And also I'm representing Russian Orthodox Church Patriarchal Commission on the Family, Protection of Motherhood and Childhood. I'm doing international relations for this entity. And as you may know, Russian Orthodox Church takes a very conservative, consistent position on all our issues. And we're rather happy about that. And in the last 20-25 years, we have unprecedented, I would say, resurrection of Christianity, of faith in Russia. In the last 20 years, we have rebuilt over 30,000 new churches in Russia. And this process goes on as we speak. Right now in Moscow only there is a program to build 200 new churches. And I think while many of the churches are being closed down or turned into concert halls in some of the countries in Western Europe, in Russia and Eastern Europe, the trend is quite the opposite, and you can hardly get into a church on Sunday in Moscow. Many young people go there, and this is an interesting phenomenon that maybe mass media don't tell you necessarily about Russia. So please have a more balanced picture about what is happening in Russia, because there is a lot of disinformation going on, and please know that there is a huge spiritual revival in Russia. According to last surveys, 82% believe in God of population of Russia, and there are over 70% identify themselves as Orthodox Christians, and also we have some Muslim, Buddhist, and of course Catholic and Protestant population, but 82% totally believe in God, and that's amazing after 70 years of communist persecutions. Just to give you some figures, before the Bolshevik Communist Revolution of 1917, there were around 100,000 churches and chapels in Russia altogether, and just within 20 years there was only 100 left for the huge country. And they had this 5 years plans, the communists in the 20s and 30s, and they said that the official plan for the next five years is that even the name of God is forgotten forever in Russia. And those plans didn't materialize, and we see the miracle, how the truth prevails. And just to give some explanation maybe about why Europe today is divided, as you mentioned, between East and West, I think one of the reasons is this Marxist ideology, how it developed in both parts of Europe. As you may know, the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was inspired by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who were not Russians ethnically. So this was imported from the West, adapted to Russian conditions, and implemented. So as Engels has said in his work, Private Property, Family, and the State, the family is an oppressive unit that should be abolished in the bright future of socialism. And all those radical ideas, sexual revolution ideas, social transformation, they were all tested first in Russia right after the revolution. Russia was the first country to legalize abortion in 1920, and Roe Wade happened only in 1973, so we experienced it 53 years before. And then homosexuality was decriminalized. That was one of the first decrees of Bolsheviks. Easy divorce was introduced, and this free love concept was very much tested and practiced in the 20s. There was this lady Kollontai who was promoting this free love attitudes. And they would build in the 20s the houses in Russia without private kitchens, because everybody was supposed to eat in the canteens, collectivist style, and there should be no locking of the family apartments because everybody should live together, free love, and all those radical ideas were really tested first in Russia. But then all those revolutionary Trotskyites, Leon Trotsky followers, world revolutionary thinkers, they were pushed out in the late 30s by Stalin, who took a more traditionalist hardline kind of approach. And many of those intellectuals, they have immigrated to Europe and started the so-called Frankfurt School of Thought, which you may have heard of in Western Germany. And they were thinking why the world revolution didn't succeed. It was successful only in Russia, but not globally, as was the Marxist concept telling. So they started to analyze what was the problem. And they came to the conclusion that the brains of workers in the West are so much under influence of Christian or traditionalist bourgeois, as they call it, mentality, that until Christian traditions are destroyed, there can be no success of the world revolution. And there was this Hungarian revolutionary, Georg Lukács, who was the education minister during a short period of time of a Hungarian socialist republic in 1920 of Bela Kun. And he was the first to introduce sexual education in schools. Because he said, if we introduce sexual education in schools and grow up the new generation, that is the best way to make a world revolution succeeding. So after those radical ideas were pushed out of Russia until the fall of the Soviet Union, more traditionalist, more normal kind of family values in a wicked, strange communist way, but there were still no extremes. So until the end of the Soviet Union, there was no sexual revolution in the Soviet bloc or in the communist countries. While in the West, those revolutionaries, they have merged in the 30s and 40s and 50s the ideas of classical Marxism with the Sigmund Freud and with this sexual approach with the Freudism, and they came up with this concept of sexual revolution of the 60s, drugs revolution, that Western Europe and Western world has experienced. So I think this is one of the reasons that because of the terrible persecution of the communist times, but still because of this, Eastern European countries were protected from this sexual revolution of the 60s, drugs revolution, and I think that could be one of the reasons why there is still a division between East and West in Europe until now. While in the West, people were bombarded in the 60s with all those sexual revolutionary messages, which are neo-Marxist messages, but in a new form. And I think this is one of the reasons why we have those differences now. And another reason is because we have suffered, and Russians have suffered more than any other nation from communist persecution, but also the Polish, the Hungarians, all the Eastern European countries. We have we have gained this instinct or this very deep feeling of when a new type of lie or propaganda is being imposed on us, we immediately can identify it and reject it. So when
Why does we online?
because people I think more naive in many ways in Western countries who didn't suffer communism, especially in the United States. People believe whatever television is telling you. Oh, good. So I hear this on CNN. fine. Or somebody's telling me, okay. But I think in Eastern Europe, people are more resistant to any propaganda. And I think now this new type of totalitarianism or propaganda that is emerging is more dangerous than the communist propaganda because it comes in a soft way, soft form. It's not so straightforward. During communist times, they came and punched you in your face. You knew immediately that that was wrong, and you could resist, fight, and win at the end. While now, where is the enemy? Everything is fine. You know, I can go to a shopping mall, watch television, MTV, and there is no clear enemy. But nevertheless, this is, I think, even more dangerous because it comes in a soft form. When you put a frog into a pot and start to boil the water into a cold water and start to boil it gradually, step by step, it gets, killed. And if you put the frog into the hot water, it will immediately jump out and live. So I think if you do it step by step, okay, now same-sex marriage legalization, then drugs legalization, step by step, not really in a violent way, for human rights, for political correctness, people get hypnotized, or they tend to sleep and not to resist. And I think here is another reason why Eastern and Western European countries differ even now. And we have seen at the last synod that Eastern European bishops were probably Pan-Africans. But Eastern European bishops were one of the strongest in defending the traditional Catholic doctrine of faith, right? While in the West, people tend to be more soft on those issues or accepting those ideas. And I think here Eastern Europe can really help now our brothers in the West. Because you helped us, the Westerners, defeat the communists, and now we can help you defeat the new type of softer totalitarianism. So that's about it. And the last point, last 2 points I wanted to make is that surprisingly to me, and I think to maybe to you as well, such a large country as Germany is not having yet a strong pro-family movement. And I think this, I hope we will see some kind of pro-family, pro-life movement emerging in Germany. And I had some talks with some people in Berlin who want to create this, but maybe if we all can kind of share our connections or experiences and really help the German movement, because in France there is La Manif pour tous, in Spain we have Ignacio, Astoir, and millions of people march, but in Germany it's the largest country in Europe, but still not a big movement. And the last point is that I think we should look ahead a little bit and keep in mind what is on the plans of those powerful lobbies who are now advancing so-called LGBT, etc. There are 58, I think, genders now. They keep increasing. So all those LGBTQIR, whatever it is. After they will advance this as they think, the next stage could be transhumanism, because they will say that people should liberate themselves not only from their gender identity, which is the battlefront now, but also from their human identity. Because you need to experiment, you need to be genetically modified a little bit, eat some drugs, pharmaceuticals, enhance your abilities, artificial intelligence, artificial parts of your body. And then there are very serious people like Google, NASA, and others. They work towards this goal so humans can live forever. They become immortals. And by 2045, there are serious plans. They calculate that the computers will become so powerful that the artificial intelligence will take over control of humanity plans on a UN level. So if computer, and there is no moral limits of computer is just effective calculating. So if, for example, for Africa, computer will say, okay, 80 million people, I don't know, is enough. So they will start to implement some programs to reduce. For Europe, that much. For Russia, that much. And it's really scary. But this is, I think, could be the next challenge, because already now there are political parties in Europe that protect non-human rights. So cyborgs and people with genetically modified organisms, merging of robots, machines with humans. And technologically, it's almost ready. We're on the edge of breakthroughs that will allow this in next years. And you know how much Hollywood is promoting all these agendas, and they call it singularity, etc. So, and this is again the continuation of the attack on the God-given image in us and the God-given plan for humans. First, they wanted us to get rid of our religious identity, and French Revolution was a major step in this. Then national identity, now gender identity, and then human identity. So, you know, they create the God's image in us. But I think that if we are together, we can prevail. And the example of Russia, which suffered 70 years of very severe persecutions, and we have this spiritual revival in recent 20 years. This example teaches us that, and Eastern Europe in general, of course, Poland and Hungary and all other countries, gives us hope. And together, East and West, helping each other, I think with God's help we can win. Thank you very much.
So, good afternoon everybody. As Justin said, I represent here the European Large Families Confederation. Now, large families, they may have religious or political backgrounds which are very different from family to family. Nevertheless, they share a conservative view on the family, and that is common. So we can easily understand each other in matters of the family. Otherwise, there may be stronger controversies. But in the large family movement, these controversies don't come up. Now, concerning a general view on the family, as you could hear, there is a big difference between the East and the West. Now, I would like to give some more reasons for the present bad situation of families in Europe. And one of them concerns also this East-West difference. Namely, due to the wealth and the extreme individualism which prevails in Western Europe, say since the early 60s, people no longer wanted to rely on each other. So there is a strong individualism. They thought that they could resolve all their problems alone. They didn't need to ask for help from others. In the same way, they didn't need to help others. And since this depended on wealth, it was available in Western Europe, but not in Eastern Europe. And in Eastern Europe, people had to help each other. If they faced difficulties, these difficulties could be solved on a collective basis, but not individually. And that was our experience. And sorry to say, I must say that what I see, I don't really know the situation about this in Russia, but what I see in several countries, post-Soviet countries like Czechia, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, already partly also Romania and the Baltic states, this mentality is spreading. There are more and more people who take side on this strong individualism. And the other thing which came with this same wave is that individual pleasure and advantages of the moment are considered as above everything. And this came together with, so to say, technical and medical possibilities of the sexual revolution. But these two things go together. So this shows that in this bad development that happened in Europe, a decline of mentality plays a very important role. Now, according to the classical teaching on the functioning of society, we have two pillars, rights and duties. In my understanding, this is inadequate. There is a third very important pillar which is missing, and that is responsibilities. Within a family, responsibilities are far more important than duties and rights. If in the family you want to stress your rights, you fight against the others. If to the children you always say, this is your duty, that is your duty, that will not be very effective. But if everybody sees in the family that there are responsibilities, and we share responsibilities in the functioning of the family, that helps. That helps to bring things in a good way. Now, so, as I have just said, a spread of wealth had an important role in the bad direction of family life. Now, where does this come from? This comes from the idea of the welfare state. That was introduced first in Germany by Bismarck in the late 19th century, and then it expanded very strongly in Europe after the Second World War. Far more in the capitalist part of Europe, and to a relatively small extent in the communist-dominated part. Now, beginning with the 1960s, more and more people decided to rely on the welfare system and not on their family, which meant they had very few children or no children at all. So the situation is, in Europe in general, that the population is shrinking and aging. There are few children, few marriages, many divorces, many cohabitations, many abortions. And as Maria already mentioned, a large part of children and youth have no experience whatsoever about a complete family. So they miss a very important example for their life. Another point is that the fundamental legal and social unit of society is now the individual and not the family. And that works also very strongly against families. And as we could hear partly from the example in Sweden, an ever-growing percentage of youth wants to stop having relations with the society and would like to find their happiness outside society. This is a reason of various deviances. Now, the fact that the individual is the fundamental legal and social unit in society prevails so strongly that although constitutions in almost all European countries stress that family is the fundamental unit of society, and constitutions have various other family-friendly declarations, legislation creates laws and circumstances which are bad for families. This reflects in taxation, in various kinds of supports in the pension system. And these new regulations, which are not family friendly, make the individuals counter-interested against family bonds. And together with all these, the respect of life is also diminishing. Now, what happens if there are very few children? So people rely on the welfare system. Well, the outcome of this is what economists call the free rider problem. If there are things which are available for everybody, whether you take part in establishing that or not, then more and more people would try to make use of them without their own contribution. And that happens nowadays when people get old and they have no children, but they want to make use of the future generation when getting their pensions or using the social security system, which systems are run by those people who are in working age at that time, but they have not contributed to having the next generation. Very interesting studies have been made recently in 10 European countries. If one considers money transfer between groups in society, then payments are made by that group in society which is in working age. And the transfer goes towards minors and towards seniors. Contrary to what most people imagine, in the case of minors, 30% of the amount needed for their life comes through money transfer from the working group. In the case of seniors, it is 80 to 90%. And this is in 10 different European countries, which means that present society is very much scared about how senior people live, but they don't have real interest in how children live. And other economic studies showed that considered in a lifetime, there is a huge money transfer from people with children to people without children. Most people think that those people who have no children, they invest money in children of others. This is totally false. When the European Commission launched its growth strategy, Europe 2020, in 2010, one of the objectives was achieving the employment level for both men and women aged 20 to 64 years at 75%. This is not possible if a significant proportion of women is providing care and education for their children, particularly preschoolers. Therefore, the Commission encouraged Member States to create the conditions for inclusion of mothers in the labour market as soon as possible that would reduce the period of maternity and parental leave. They were advised to expand childcare services so that to assure compulsory places in kindergartens for 90% of children aged between 3 and 6. Such recommendations are the result of selective blindness due to lack of definition of the family and family policy. The labour market takes precedence over the wishes of many women to provide a full-time care for their small children. These policies contradict the human nature. They underestimate the value of informal work for social welfare and ignore the crucial role of the family in building and maintaining social cohesion and solidarity between generations. Another point which is raised in several countries, it came up in France after the First World War. And then about 20 years ago in Germany, and later also in Hungary, in Austria, maybe also in other countries, it is the idea that the voting system in our countries is unjust. In the same way as 100 years ago, women had no voting rights. Now, minors have no voting rights. And therefore, politics is not really interested in matters concerning minors. And one possibility would be that children also get voting rights, which is exercised by their parents, who are responsible for the children. That would immediately mean that children, the fate of children would get far more importance in politics. And to finish, I would like to quote the late member of the Hungarian Constitutional Court, Jaroslaw Wyszynski, who was a great protagonist of families, who tried to explain that in spite of anything that governments can do for the families, it is our responsibility what will follow. He said, families, communities of love, cannot be created by right and law. This can be achieved only by our life based on a consistent scale of values, by transmitting the example of appealing families to the world.
Very much. My name is Father Jay. I have been working for Faculty for Studies on the Family for 27 years. It's a Catholic university in Warsaw. Maria mentioned that this is quite strange company, especially for me. We were invaded by Sweden, 1655 to 1660. We won. When partially divided into Russian in 1772 and by Hungarian, we won. But now we are together and we fight together. So we are fighters. But what is the fight? What is the place when we should really be united? It's like previous panel finished that the true soldier is not the one who hates the people in front of him, but who loves the people who are behind him. So what is the fight? And I think the fight is, we should fight for language. Because our language change. And with the language, we think differently. And I'm afraid we start to think wrongly. For example, I will give you two examples. The one is our identity. I understand this word, and yes, this is like this word works. But generally, what the people do is introducing themselves, and they say, "I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher, I'm a mechanic, I'm a CEO, I am a manager." And this is what the people present as their identity. And we can say, oh, I'm also married, or I have my wife. And what we say, we have, or I have children, will never grow, positively. We will grow where we can, when we recognize what is our identity. So we can spend 5 years just to receive a title, Master of some science, and we will be expert in teaching geography. And we'll spend years to be a CEO, so studies and then postgraduate studies, and again studies and trainings, finally we'll be CEO. And we grow. And nothing like this happened with our marriage. We based on, well, I'm from the family, so I saw my mom and daddy, so I know how to be a good husband, how to be a good wife. At the same moment, children or teenagers, when I ask them about what the kind of marriage you would like to have, and generally all the people say, oh, better than my parents. But how to do better if you do not grow in this area? So, for example, you will be back home Sunday night, and you will take your alarm clock and you will set alarm for tomorrow, for Monday. Who will be awakened? Generally, worker. It is your time at my work. If you are a woman, probably the first person awakened in you will be mother, to help children to get up and have a breakfast and be ready to school. So this is what we have. Our alarm clock starts on Sunday night, and I will be awakened as a worker. So I'll be back home tired, and I also set my alarm for the next day and the next day. And who will be awakened on Saturday morning? A lazy man or whatever. This is the same happens with our calendars. If I will ask you, okay, give me your smartphone, open your calendar, and I will tell you who you are. Because I will check and I will find it's meetings, appointments, I have a scheduled visit as my dentist. I have a lot of things to do. Will I find your spouse in your calendar? Will I find that you prepared a date with your wife and you are thinking about, invite her, sending her text, be ready, in 3 days we are going somewhere. If our wife is not on our calendars, we do not think about her. If we think about my profession, we will not grow in our marriage. And the other area where we should also find is the way how we think about our children. Because generally what I found that people say, I have a child. Or the better educated people say, we have children. Do you really have child or children? Nobody can have another person. We receive a child as a gift from God, cooperating with parents, but it's not your possession. So the next challenge or the next fight is the way how we think about children. We do not have children, and we do not have right to have children. We are parents. I am happy husband and happy father of 4. I am happy mother. I am happy wife and mother of 5. This is my identity. I can't have wife. I can't have husband. I can't have child or children. I could be. This is about being. And you have a very beautiful language. It's like you say, human being. Not human behavior or human doers, or human being. So we should think properly about ourselves, about our identity. Because this is the future. We fight for the future. The way how we think about our identity, that we will work in the society. And that we have the difference between civilization of love and civilization of death. The civilization of death is the world of things. This is the based on possession we have. This is the world of IVF. We have the right to have a children, so we will pay and they will give us children. The civilization of love speaks about being. And if we are infertile, and the infertility is only some information something is wrong, we have nanotechnology. We have the way how we can diagnose what is the main problem with my infertility. And the doctors will help me to become fertile, and then we can be parents. IVF doesn't ask you what's the reason you are not fertile. They will just give you a child, but you were sick, you are sick, you will be sick, and nobody takes care of you, because this is civilization of having, not of being. If you will pay, they will give you. And this is a lot of bad stories about having the children. If the child is diagnosed with something wrong, they will terminate this pregnancy because the child is sick. I paid for the beautiful child without any defect. And the last one, my child or our child. You became parents because of the most unique, intimate action where you were absolutely united, one body. And your child is the consequence of your unity. If you will name your child Mai, it's like you are not seeing your husband or your wife in your child. So you can't say Mai because it's always yours. And a huge responsibility for parents is to recognize the unity, their unity. I put around. This is the way why it's so important that the marriage, the family should be based on marriage, not on children. I know that there is no family without children, and still it's a marriage, but with children you can be family. But family is based on marriage, not on children. And the way how you recognize your identity is the way how you can help your children grow as an independent identities. Thank you so much.